Hey, Rod, obviously the top story of the morning, outside of the new show and what we're doing, is the landscape-changing weekend in college athletics. It all came down on Friday. And I know I was talking we were out at the lake this weekend visiting my good buddy's got a lake house out on Lake LBJ.
Must be nice.
Yeah, we hadn't been out all summer. Normally, we've been going to we've been fortunate enough to be invited to their lake house ever since our kids were born. So 25 years. Our kids are 25 now, our oldest. So we were going out there.
Look at it for a long time then.
I know. Yeah, we've known.
Nice.
Yeah. Our kids, our oldest kids, were born on the same day. So his daughter and my son. So they've been tight all along. So we've gone out. And so just talking to people, and it's amazing to me how many people were like, "Man, this came down so fast." Like, no, this has been coming
for a long time.
It's one of those. You understand that we get real inside baseball and inside the game, but it was pretty clear to me that as far back as June, we were talking about. Look, if the Pac-12 doesn't put a media rights deal in front of its membership that is close to what the Big 12 has gotten, they're going to fall apart. I mean, they're going to break up. You just can't keep them. They can say whatever they want because everybody would, even like national writers would quote presidents of schools and quote. Well, look, they're not going to say it to you. They're not going to tell you. They're going to toe the company line until they can't. And that's what they did. But everyone understood behind the scenes that if George Kliavkoff, the commissioner, couldn't get a deal together that could be at least close to what the Big 12 is, then it was going to fracture and it was going to fall apart. And we told you all through July that they went to Pac-12 Media Day and there wasn't a deal. There wasn't an offer made. There wasn't anything to put in front of it. And that's when Colorado. I said, watch when these school presidents go back to campus after media day and they didn't have a presentation from the commissioner, they're going to have hard talks about, okay, we've been patient on this thing. We're waiting 13 months for a new media rights deal. We got to do what's best for us at this point. Right. And that's exactly what happened. And we also told you last week that, before this all came down to, keep an eye on the Big Ten. Big Ten's just kind of waiting. Just because they're not saying anything doesn't mean they're not talking behind the scenes. Oregon and Washington obviously were in play, and that was going to drop what happened. I mean, so it all came down quickly over a one-day period, but at the same time, it began long ago, and really when Colorado made the initial jump, that really, the defections were coming right beyond that. And you pointed out accurately, Rod, earlier, and you can reset all that. It's an amazing fall from where this conference was a mere 12 years ago.
No, really, it's crazy. You can't even really believe it. You brought up how they accomplished a lot in terms of on the field success going back to 2011.
If you go back to the final standings of 2011, the Pac-12 had 3 teams in the top 7. Oregon, USC, and Stanford were all in the top 7 in the country in football.
Come on, a little over 10 years ago.
Which means you're a power conference, right? You're
not only the power conference.
Sexy brands, huge brands. USC, Oregon with Chip Kelly. I mean, you are a big-time – Stanford had Jim Harbaugh, then David Shaw, and you were this powerhouse. And here they are now.
In that same year you're talking about, they signed the richest TV deal in college sports at the time. They had a $3 billion deal over 12 years. It was the richest TV deal in college sports at the time. So they're on top of the mountain. And in a little over 10 years, they have had so much bad leadership, so many bad decisions at the top. It ultimately has led to the dissolution of that conference. And what I hate about it is, or I hate it for Pac-12 fans, is that there were numerous chances for Pac-12 leadership to either dissolve or remove the Big 12 as a threat. Larry Scott even recognized it in 2011, actually, right after the first round of realignment from the Big 12. This is a quote from Larry Scott, former Pac-12 commissioner. Quote, "We could have expanded, but the deal didn't make any sense at the end of the day for us, especially given the position that we are in," which was a power position at the time. He went on to say, "There's a very high bar. It's hard to imagine very many scenarios for our conference to expand because our bar is so high." This is what he said after basically this is ESPN article says that Larry Scott chose to pass on Oklahoma and Texas, and that was the reason he gave.
Yeah. Bar is high, which means that probably Oklahoma not up to the academic standards that we hold.
Oklahoma State or Tech, none of those would have been up if Texas.
Well, that's when I hear him say the bar.
Yeah.
Well, our bar's really high. We don't want just any school, and that's the hubris, right? It's fine to have that. But at the same time, it's going to lead to the demise of your conference because this is a big business, and the dollars are going to speak. The almighty dollar and the TV dollars will be what keeps you alive. And as Pac-12 Matt says, Larry Scott blew this 12 years ago. This has been in motion since he dropped the ball in the Big 12.
He did, but Klyavkov had a chance. Klyavkov had multiple chances.
No
Klyavkov
question.
was approached by Bob Bowlesby, the Michael Scott of conference commissioners, right after Texas and Oklahoma were reportedly leaving. And at that time, Bob Bowlesby went hat in hand to Klyavkov and said, hey, let's merge. We're both weak, but together we can be really strong, and we actually can skip ahead. We actually can, find a way to skip ahead a lot of these other conferences, get us a better deal, and we will have the leg up in expansion because we'll have probably 16 teams. Even back then, Klyavkov said no and also refused. Not only rebuffed the Big 12, but refused to expand and said we will not expand. And then a year later, he came back to the Big 12, a new commissioner, Brett Yarmark, and asked for the same deal, a merger. And Brett Yarmark said, nah, we're good here. Yeah. We're good.
Yeah.
So multiple chances they missed to put the kibosh on the Big 12.
Well, and as this texter says, the Pac-12 died. Great point, by the way, when USC and UCLA left. That's true. And look, when you lose your two biggest brands, and Oregon's probably a bigger brand than UCLA right now, but this history of basketball, the LA market, UCLA is a massive brand. USC is obviously one of the biggest brands in the history of college athletics. And you're in the second largest media market in the country.
Yep.
When those two left, that put them in dire straits. I agree with that. But there's still things they could have done, as we've talked about. The mind-numbing part about media contracts and TV networks is playing in different time zones. I know fans don't want to hear that, but to someone who's going to spend the dollars to acquire your conference and put it on television, they need more than one time zone. They don't need just Pacific time zone games. They want games early. They want games midday. They want games late. And that's what's going to sell. That's why they're going to pay the big bucks. That's why the Big Ten is going to make $100 million per team annually starting in 2024. That's why Texas is moving to the SEC for the TV dollars. But to your point, I mean, you're right. Larry Scott set it in motion, but you also said it. They signed a 12-year deal after 2011. This is the end of that deal.
It is.
And they haven't signed a new one since that deal. And they've just dissolved as a conference. And, I mean, it's a shame. Now, look, USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington, they can still thrive as programs, as members of the Big Ten. Brett Yormark will make it his he needs to help replace the brands of Texas and Oklahoma and the value. So he's going to help push the rivalry between Arizona and Arizona State and BYU and Utah.
Yep.
Colorado needs a new natural rival in the Big 12. You have to raise and elevate. You got to get into the city of Houston and really grow the Houston program because that's the fourth largest market in the country. TCU has to continue to rise. That's the fifth or sixth largest media market in the country, the DFW Metroplex. That's where you got to win because you're not going to have Texas and Oklahoma anymore in your conference. I would also say this, through all of these college realignment, university realignment conversations we've had, everybody talked about, having relegation like they do in Premier League soccer. Well, think about where Cincinnati, Central Florida, and Houston are now starting in 2024 compared to where they were, and think about where Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and and Washington State are about to be. They got relegated.
Yeah, they did.
And Houston, Central Florida, Cincinnati, they just elevated. They get to play with the big boys now. Separation
of had and had nots. And honestly, I wouldn't doubt that in the future, you'll start to see teams somehow get jettisoned out of these conferences like this. This is consolidation going on here.
I agree with you.
And I would see some kind of contraction going on potentially where TV networks we're not going to air Purdue games. We're not airing Indiana games. We got Blue Bloods to air. That's what the people want. That gets ratings. That gets us advertising dollars. So I could see them almost unofficially kind of, basically putting those other lesser brands, mid-tier brands, kind of putting them on the back burner.
Well, especially if you're collecting your Purdue and your Indiana and the Northwestern. You're collecting $100 million annually.
So they're shut up.
Put your money into the football program. We should be able to put good, this should be a lot like the NFL at a lot of levels, right? This is the fear of all the other conferences is when you've got 18 teams collecting $100 million each, they all should be really good. And the entire athletic department should be thriving. We played this a little bit ago, the Eli Drinkwitz comments. He's not wrong.
No.
This is all about football. And yes, the basketball team has to travel and the volleyball team has to travel. And it's going to be arduous, but they got $100 million to try to offset that. Hell, buy a university plane.
No, but that's exactly right. I mean, that type of money can change a program. And the question is, did the Pac-12 fall behind? It's a chicken or the egg, right? Did the Pac-12 fall so far behind the other Power 5 conferences because they weren't getting enough revenue to invest in their programs, and that's why they fell behind? Or were they already lagging behind, and that's why they weren't a sexy enough, attractive enough, product to put on TV or to attract TV networks to give them a new media rights deal? I don't know which one it is.
It's a good chicken and egg question. But
which came first?
But if you go back to that 2011 year with the 3 top 7 teams, well, Stanford's not what they were. USC wasn't for a long time.
Just got back.
Oregon, after Chip Kelly left, never got it back. They're just starting to get back into that tier. So, yeah, the Pac-12 was full of empty state. They used to have their Pac-12 championship game on a Friday night and it'd be empty. Wouldn't be any fans there.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I mean, look, TV networks look, no one. And then guess what else happened, Rod? You know this. Their best players from the West Coast were leaving to go play in the SEC and play in the state of Texas.
Yep, I remember that.
I mean, think of Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud and Bijan Robinson. All these great players from the West Coast, and those are just the biggest examples. Who's the kid that Uiagalelei, who went to Clemson? I mean, over and over again, the number 1 player in California would bolt to go east to play on TV.
Yep.
On TV in big games in the SEC or in the ACC at Clemson, most notably. And so you dissolve the talent, you dissolve the interest, the stadiums aren't full, the TV contracts don't get fulfilled. And in the end, you got to go where the pastures are greener. You have to. Yeah. And I think that's at the end of the day, it's a century-old historic conference. But at the same time, the mismanagement, the lack of leadership, at some point, each school just had to say, we got to do what's best for us here. We got to, to a point where there was a point on Friday where Arizona was ready to bolt Arizona State. And they say, look, if you're not going,
we're going.
We're going anyhow.
Yeah.
Good luck. And, that came on the heels of Oregon and Washington, which then, of course, Utah and Arizona State. And by the way, you should put the Arizona State president in the bad leader pile because he's been a big –
oh, yeah. This guy says he's not going to Morgantown?
Michael Crow. Yeah, he's a guy that's been against this completely and put his, dug his heels in. And look, at some point, market forces are going to be market forces, and you got to go where your athletic department can sustain and at least be on somewhat of a even level playing field. It's not going to be even in the Big 12, but it's going to be a lot better than it was in the Pac-12. So there we are. That's where we stand. 2024, 18 in the Big 10, 16 in the Big 12. 16 in the SEC, 14 in the ACC. That is 64, Rod. That is 64 teams if you do the math. And we've been talking about 4 super conferences for a long time with 64 teams. As of 2024, which also includes a 12-team playoff, we are at that point where there are 64 teams playing major college football, and then there's the rest. And somehow Stanford is not involved in that at this point. Notre Dame isn't in that 64 team.
Yeah, they are.
They're not. Well, they would be 65th.
Because they always say 64 and then they go and Notre Dame. That's how I respect Notre Dame. It's like, the 64 and Notre Dame. They always go Power 5 and Notre Dame.
Yeah, well, they need to. I think the Big Ten's hoping that Stanford could help sway them into the Big Ten. And I've said this before. Be good. And I've said this before. I've been told this from people who are close to these conversations. Fox Television has told Notre Dame, look, you can stay with NBC. Your home games you can still have your deal independently with NBC. Say you're independent, but we will be your provider for all road games, and you will be a Fox property as part of the Big Ten.
Damn, that's how much that brand is worth. Yes. They're like, dude, keep your deal. We don't care. We'll share you. We'll share your brand.
Now, that NBC deal, however much it is, would be taken away from what they make in the Big Ten, right? It would be offset, so they'd make the same as the other schools. But if you're Notre Dame, you could double dip, right? You're making $50 million from Notre Dame. You're making $50 million from NBC, and you can still say that you're independent. And so that's. I've heard that's an option. And so Notre Dame would have to consider that, I believe, especially, Rod, with what's happening in the saber-rattling in the ACC, where Florida State is saying out loud, we want the hell out of this conference.
They want to be a free agent.
Yes.
And they don't even have, we don't know. Behind the scenes, I'm sure they've worked out something. But right now, they don't even necessarily have a home in mind. They just want to be a free agent. They just know their current state of, being with the ACC and their revenue sharing deal is something that's untenable. They was like, we can't We can't compete. Our brand is going to fall so far behind by the time the end of this media rights deal is done that Florida State won't even be a competitive brand because the teams in the SEC and in the Big Ten are making twice as much money as we're making per year.
Yeah. And they've talked about uneven revenue sharing, which we know was one of the downfalls of the old Southwest Conference and the early Big 12.